Hello, everyone. I am Zhao Chuan. Today, let's get to know Isaac the Sauropelta. Sauropelta is a genus of relatively primitive ankylosaurian dinosaur, to be precise, a nodosaurid dinosaur. Nodosaurids and ankylosaurids are the two largest groups of ankylosaurs. Ankylosaurids usually possessed a bony club at the end of their tail, and tended to have a wider and flatter body, which looked more stocky. Their body bore no long or sharp spines, and their head was more square and shorter. As a whole, ankylosaurids looked thicker. The characteristics of nodosaurids may be just the opposite. They often had sharper spines on their body, and generally no tail club on their tail end. Their body was narrower and more slender. Sauropelta is the representative of the nodosaurids. First, let's look at this model. It roughly looks like this. Sauropelta was not as flat as the familiar Ankylosaurus but more compact. It had an exceptionally proportioned structure with a very long tail. The tail of Ankylosaurus was shorter, with a bony club at the end. At a certain distance from the bony club, the tail was bound by some cartilaginous rods, and formed a solid rod-shaped structure, which was not very flexible. But this was not the case for Sauropelta. It had a very long and flexible tail. In the American Museum of Natural History, there is a mummified Sauropelta fossil. The tail of the skeleton presents a hook shape, indicating this animal's tail could do big movements when it was alive. The relatively strong muscles on both sides allowed its tail to swing flexibly in a wide range. The overall structure of Sauropelta looked a bit like Stegosaurus, including its head. If you compare its head with that of Stegosaurians, you will find that its head was more similar to dinosaurs such as Wangosaurus. That is to say, the early Stegosaurians were certainly related to the early Ankylosaurs. They might look more alike. After all, Stegosaurians and Ankylosaurs belong to the same group. After they just branched apart, they probably all looked like this. Its head is like this. Viewed from the side, it looked elongated. If looking at it from the top, you can see that the front was narrow, and the rear was wide. The eyes were located relatively backward, and the temporal fenestra was not big. There were a series of plates atop the head, making the top of its head look more solid. Its two nostrils were close to each other and pretty small, unlike some later ankylosaurs, such as Pinacosaurus, which possessed very big nostrils. It had a small beak at the anterior of its mouth. Its face still had other features shared by many ankylosaurs, such as its jugal bones having evolved small jugal horns, like most ankylosaurs. There were two huge plates at this position on its lower jaw. You can see here on this model, which also protected its head. On all the edges and corners of its face, there were relatively sharp plates, which could effectively defend itself from predators. Besides, let's talk about its mouth. The research on the mouth of ankylosaurs has changed a lot over recent years. When this group of dinosaurs were first discovered, people found their teeth were close to the inside. If we imagine looking at the head of dinosaurs from the front, carnivorous dinosaurs such as Tyrannosaurus rex or Allosaurus, their teeth were usually located on both sides, so that they could open their mouth wide to bite things, which is often not the case for herbivorous animals. Herbivorous dinosaurs, such as Iguanodon or some ornithischians, especially Ankylosaurus, its teeth were close to the inside, leaving a larger space on the sides like this. For a long time, people believed that this relatively large space was covered by cheeks, just like animals such as cows and horses we see today, which all possess cheeks on their face. It was also a bit like our cheeks. When we are eating and chewing something in the mouth, the cheeks will prevent the food from falling out. But in dinosaurs like Sauropelta, an extra feature was discovered, and it was turned out not to have such a cheek structure. It actually had an extra bone, where the face was recessed. In the early years, the collected skull of Sauropelta did not have this bone, because it was missing. Later, more complete collected fossils shows that there was actually a bone at this position. This bone is technically called the osteoderm. Osteoderms are bones derived from the middle of the skin. This structure was common in many dinosaurs. There were many plates on the body of Sauropelta. These plates were also osteoderms, that is, bones grew from the underside of the skin, forming a rigid structure. The most striking osteoderms in dinosaurs were the bony plates of Stegosaurus, which is also a large osteoderm structure. In some carnivorous dinosaurs, osteoderms were also found. For example, Ceratosaurus possessed a row of osteoderms on its back. The osteoderms on the face of Sauropelta hid another secret. Its shape coincided with this opening in the face, which could function as a baffle. We now think it might be attached to the lower jaw. When the mouth was opened, this would form a shovel-like structure that kept food in and prevented them from falling out. So in our restoration, you can see this piece on the head here makes its mouth look a little bit unhappy. A raised shape has a round osteoderm wrapped inside to prevent its food from falling out. One of the most salient features of Sauropelta was a series of long spines on its neck and shoulders. Like many ankylosaurs, it had 3 rings of collar-like armor structures around its neck. This structure existed in most ankylosaurs, with a fixed quantity. There were usually 3 rings, consisting of 6 plates in each ring, 2 pieces on the top, 2 pieces on the sides, and 2 pieces on the bottom, forming a hollow square. Most ankylosaurs possessed the same number, 6 pieces, with a ridge in the middle of each round plate, playing a role of armor, but this part of Nodosaurids was more developed, and would become long spines. For example, the well-preserved mummified Boreal fossil presents very long spines at this position. Among those dinosaurs, the long spines of Sauropelta were the most notable ones. On its neck, you can see, especially the 3rd pair at the back had evolved into a very long horn-like shape. Viewed from the fossils, this spine is slender. Still, through the research of the Boreal fossils, we know that, when ankylosaurs were alive, the spines were wrapped by a very thick, keratinous structure on the outside, making them look thicker and more powerful. So when we were doing the restoration, we added more weight based on the original fossils to make them look thicker and more robust. Sauropelta had 6 structures on each ring of its collar. The 2 in the middle of each group were relatively flat, but the ones on the sides were very sharp, facing into direction so that the carnivorous dinosaur couldn't get a bite out of its neck. We know that the necks of animals are generally fragile. If a carnivorous dinosaur attacked its neck, it would easily get killed. But such an armor structure of Sauropelta can effectively protect its neck, making it impossible for predators to bite. Next, let's follow its sharp spines to move backward, and look at the 2 longer spines on the shoulders, which were like those of many stegosaurians, such as Gigantospinosaurus, Huangosaurus, and Twogiangosaurus. Resembling the shoulder spines of stegosaurians, it also had 2 long spines. At this position, in old restorations, these spines were often placed on the top. When people first discovered these spines, they didn't know which direction they were pointing at. Considering that Sauropelta was a relatively low animal, people thought that the spines might be facing upwards, which could better prevent large carnivores, but it was later found that this was not the case. More complete fossils show that these spines actually extended down from the lower 2 sets of spines on the neck. They belong to the same group of homologous structures. After the spines became huge, they quickly shortened. The ones at the posterior became very short. Because this spine was long enough, within its protection range, there was no need for longer spines at this root, so the spines started to become shorter at this position, and there were rows of small spikes behind it. The ones at the root of the tail and buttocks became larger, and gradually widened when coming to the tail, close to the shape of the Ankylosaurus tail club. This also corresponded to many other ankylosaurs discovered later, proving that such a structure may also be typical ankylosaurs with flexible tails. The spines all became wider and wider when coming to the tail, and shaped more and more like a battle axe, or a flat, sharp weapon. Then, they got broader and broader towards the tail end, and the distance between them was longer. The distance between the spines on the tail of many later ankylosaurs was not so wide. This is because the tail of Sauropelta was more flexible, and the long interval was convenient for the tail to move. In addition, a complete mummified fossil of the back of Sauropelta is exhibited at the American Museum of Natural History. This rare fossil shows what the entire back of Sauropelta looked like. The fossils present that, first of all, the back was composed of a large number of irregular and different-shaped scales like a mosaic collage, and the scales were about coin-sized or mosaic tile-sized, covering the entire back. Between these scales were interspersed larger scales, with the size of a human's fist. As seen on this model, these represent the larger scales. These larger scales were all arranged in rows covering the entire back. These scales also appeared row by row on its pelvis, which was greatly different from the pelvis of other ankylosaurs discovered at that time. Before this, people have discovered relatively complete ankylosaurs, such as Polacanthus, with large protrusions arranged irregularly, not in rows. In addition, the fossils of Sauropelta show that some larger polygonal scales spliced together to form a mosaic pattern. From a distance, it looked a bit like the armor of an armadillo, but was completely different from the appearance of Sauropelta. This shows that, although the armors of ankylosaurs were similar, they had vast differences. Although different ankylosaurs may have the same plates, they were arranged in entirely diverse patterns, or were of various sizes. The fossils of Sauropelta present that all the way to the tail, the plates were arranged row by row. Besides, the mummified Sauropelta fossil also shows that its torso was much narrower than the later ankylosaurs, unlike many ankylosaurs' broad torso. From below, you can see that its left and right feet were relatively close to each, which is also confirmed by the footprint fossils. The footprints show that its feet were not far apart from left to right. We know that many later ankylosaurs, such as Euoplocephalus or Ankylosaurus, had only 3 toes on their hind feet. However, as a primitive ankylosaur, Sauropelta had 4 toes on each foot, and the footprints also show it possessed 4 toes. Good. The above concludes our introduction to Isaac the Sauropelta. Thank you all.